Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Port Industry Annual Convention. What a great day yesterday was, and I couldn't be happier with the quality of the opening ceremony, our special guest, sponsor, and keynote speakers. The networking salons were all fully booked, and I could feel and hear the positive buzz coming out of those sessions as I sat outside the salons yesterday afternoon. And what to say about Emmitt Smith? Now, I grew up in New England, so I'm never going to qualify as a Dallas Cowboy fan, but man, I'm an Emmitt Smith fan for life now. We've got another strong program in place today, starting with a discussion around supply chain challenges and potential solutions. Brandis from the Port of Oakland will tee that session up in just a moment, and Ronan from Transport Topics and the host of Sirius XM Radio's Road Dog Warrior program will moderate. Ronan, by the way, has the best radio voice I've ever heard since the legendary Paul Harvey. I thought he'd like that. Remember to keep visiting the exhibit hall during our breaks. There's another 8 gift baskets to be raffled off still today, and be sure to sign up for the networking salons that begin today at 3:15. And last but not least, be sure to join us tonight beginning at 5:30 p.m. for the ending session at the world-famous Moody Theater. So let's get this started. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bryan Brandis, Maritime Director, Port of Oakland.
Well, good morning, everybody. How are you guys doing? Oh, that was good. That was good. All right, so for those of you who know that this is my first AAPA conference, and what a great group of people, and what a great event. So really, hats off to the AAPA team. I really enjoyed it. I mean, it wasn't 8:30 in the morning. It would be time for a cheers, but this is a little too early. So again, my name is Bryan Brandis, the Director of Maritime. I joined the Port of Oakland mid last year, and so right in the middle of COVID, I moved from LA to up to Oakland, and transitioned from the private side to the public side. So that's a lot of change, and I couldn't be, what really made it a positive event is the team in Oakland. I mean, what a great team, and I'm really thankful for the team in Oakland. I mean, they made an easy transition. So throughout my career, I've worked in for container lines, for terminal operators, and anytime I had interactions, with friends and family, they, asked, really interested in, the industry, what we did. Nobody ever really understood it, right? They all say, okay, all right, what do you do? Okay, yeah, that sounds great. But what a change in today, right? I mean, today, every single person you talk to knows exactly what your industry is and how it personally affects their lives. I mean, we heard from Mario, right? It affected his salmon. I was at a Greek restaurant the other night. There's no Greek wine at this restaurant. So, I mean, just some few examples locally how it really affects and impacts our own lives. And I think that's a good thing right now, right? We need to take advantage of that. I mean, that's it's a global issue, definitely, impacting everyone in the U.S., and we need to take advantage of that. So what we're doing at the Port of Oakland is we brought together a stakeholder group that's composed of regulatory agencies, community groups, and industry folks, bringing them together to try to set really a level playing field of the basic understanding of the business and how we impact each other, really so that we can move forward and figure out how to grow, the Port of Oakland in the best, in the most sustainable way. So I'm really looking forward to today because the topic of today is, the disruption and really talking about, the solutions. So without further delay, I'd like to welcome Ronan with Transport Topics to get this session going.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for settling in for what I think is going to be a very insightful one-hour discussion on some of the big challenges that are facing your industry and facing and getting a lot of media attention as well, as you've seen coverage not just in the industry trade, but also in the general full-service media. First off, let me introduce myself. I'm Dan Ronan. I'm the associate editor at Transport Topics, that's ttnews.com. And as Chris said, I'm also a show host and anchor on Sirius XM channel 146. It's called Transport Topics Radio and the Road Dog Trucking News Channel. And I cover, among other things, ports for ttnews.com. Before I introduce this morning's panel, I'm going to open the floor up for questions at about the 45-minute mark. So I want to let you know that we'd like some audience participation later in the discussion. So start thinking of your questions now, and as we get moving along, as the flow of conversation gets moving, we'll have the people come in and ask some questions off the floor. Now let me introduce our panelists for this morning's discussions. Alexandra Griffon with Blue Cargo joins us, and I should tell you that she is a true logistics professional because of, we're going to ask and talk about this a little bit, about how she got up here and arrived here in Austin this morning, and it's a fascinating story, and she once again proved her mettle as a true logistics professional. Jim Rinchuiso is the managing director of the Ocean Project with FedEx. Steve Witt is the founder and the CEO of a company called the Dray Alliance. Jim Wolfe, president and CEO of the Northwest Seaport Alliance. Mario Cordero, the executive director, Port of Long Beach. Here's Mario. Steve. John Wolfe. All right. Lot to talk about, folks. Lots to discuss. Lots of things in the news, indeed, as well. First off, your port out in Long Beach is getting a lot of attention. I checked in the other day with some of the officials out there. 64 ships waiting off the coast, waiting to get in the bay. And you've recently announced some big announcements in terms of a 24/7 operation. How's this going to work?
Great question. And I think, number one, it's not going to work in the short term.
So this isn't going to be a problem. We snap our fingers and it's solved by Christmas and the trees are under the tree and everybody's happy.
This is a supply chain issue. And I think looking to the future, something needs to change when you talk about the volumes here that major gateways around the world, specifically in the United States, have at this point. So I think it's a trigger to what needs to be done. And just for the record, the 64 vessels are not just to get into the Port of Long Beach, it's LA Long Beach. As you know, it's a complex, the nation's largest port complex. There's 2 ports. So
close to 2 million TEUs, 2 million containers a month.
Yeah, I mean, the forecast for 2021 between the 2 ports is 20 million TEU containers. 20 million. There's no other gateway in the United States that even comes close to half that number. So, in all fairness, our men and women who are moving the cargo are doing a pretty good job with that volume. But again, as you referenced, Dan, we need to change the model because in the future, that number is not going to be any less, crisis or no crisis.
Where's it going? How much larger is it going to be?
Well, the forecast right now, if you look for the end of this decade, 2030, is around 27 million. So the forecast for 2025 will approximate 24 million. So between now and the next 4 years, I think that's the number, that 20 million and more, that we need to move at the nation's most important, significant gateway. So for me, I think, again, we need to pull the trigger on how to change the model of operation. It's not going to be easy, and it's not really the onus of the marine terminals. It's the responsibility of the supply chain to adjust to what we need to have here.
Alexandra, I promised everybody I'd give a couple minutes to explain your story because you really did prove yourself as a logistics professional to get here, and we thank you. Go ahead and tell the story of how you made it here this morning at 8:30 from Los Angeles because it's a fascinating story.
So as you may have seen yesterday night, there was a big storm. So basically my plane couldn't land from LA. We got to Houston at past midnight. And I made it thanks to an Uber driver who took me under the storm and arrived on time for the panel.
3 hours in an Uber. And how much did you sleep?
A couple hours.
And how big was the bill? How big was the Uber tab, if I may ask?
Actually, not so big for the 3-hour trip, but it was $200.
That's not bad. So you held over Austin for 2 hours as they decided if they could get a window to get in with the weather.
Yes.
And then finally they said, no, can't do, we're going to Houston.
Yes. And the plane was just waiting for when it would potentially to take off, so I couldn't take the risk.
I got to hand it to you. She made it. She made it. Great job. So to Mario's point, now that we've explained this story, this amazing story, how is technology going to solve some of the problem? Because it seems as though, when I cover the ports and I cover the industry, I am always amazed, and I shouldn't be because it's always the same story, and I'll ask you this question as well, Steve, in just a second. I am always amazed with how smart people can figure out ways to do things, to move more cargo, to increase efficiency, to increase productivity, to move things along. We have a serious problem on our hands here. Not all COVID's doing, but how are we going to do this? How are we going to solve this?
Yeah. So maybe a 30 seconds context, but I'm the founder of Blue Cargo. So we are a technology company for first mile. So helping companies move containers from the port terminals to the first warehouse and then getting over to the over the road. So what we're seeing today with especially the consequences of the pandemic, so more demand, especially online demand, and not as many workers, especially because everybody was on stay at home. So I think what we need to do and what technology is here for is empower the current workers. So that's really what we try to do. And to give examples, we work with dredge companies every day, so with a large majority of them in LA Long Beach. And today a dispatcher can only handle a certain amount of containers and sometimes not more than 100 a day, just because they have to go look up the information on where that container can go real time, like for example, the empty returns to the 12 terminal websites, and then the 6 appointment systems in LA Long Beach, because we have at least 12 terminals and 2 ports. So what it ends up at the end of the day is that they spend like half an hour on one container trying to find a return. So a concrete example of the day-to-day technology we create to empower the workers is basically giving them the information on their fingertips and helping them reduce the process. So creating what I call the back office of the trucking company, because the workers need to be more empowered. So Blue Cargo today is a single platform where you can find everything you need to know to return your empties. And the way it brings up efficiency is that it takes down the time that it takes for a dispatcher to find its empty return by 4. And it's a proactive system that, for example, sends notification when there is a change at the terminal. Steve knows the system. And tell you when you can't return a container that was planned to be returned, tells you when there's a risk to go to per diem. And basically, you can proactively act and make sure you create another planning. So we save dry runs. Not having dry runs save congestion at the terminal. And we have a big focus on making like more dual transaction, because when we were talking about the change that needs to happen at the port, and I know it's a big focus at the Port of Long Beach, is making more dual transaction, because that will automatically reduce the congestion. So I think what technology is here for is really empower the current workforce and give them the tools to perform their job even better.
I want to address this to everybody on the panel. I'll start with Jim, because you're with FedEx, and I think this is an interesting point that is relevant to what's taking place. Because of COVID, we started about 18 months ago where e-commerce was responsible for about 14, 15% of the economy. Now it's 25, 26%. So it's gained that much market share in 18, 24 months. And that was expected to be a 2027 number. So we've done this 5, 6 years ahead of time. Your company is moving hundreds of millions of pieces, parcels every day. How can we accommodate this enormous shift in the retail, in the consumers buying, and not just buying small things? Perfect example. I bought a refrigerator a couple of weeks ago. Went down to my store, picked it out, paid for the thing, showed up at my house on a final mile thing. How can we accommodate this tremendous change that's taking place that's impacting all of the operations at the facilities and the companies you work for?
Yeah, so as you said, I mean, COVID has completely changed consumption, right? And probably the biggest challenge that we are facing as a full, door-to-door logistics provider is data aggregation. I think that's the key. And what I mean by that is the ability to track, talking about Uber as an example, to make logistics, an ocean freight in my world, look like an Uber app, where you're aggregating data from a factory in China to, a trucker, a barge, the ship, rail on the US side, to where we can really help importers manage their supply chains, their inventory carrying costs. So that's a big focus for FedEx right now, really on the technology side, in terms of really getting all of that data from so many disparate sources into what looks like a single platform.
Steve?
I will do a short introduction as well. My name's Steve. I'm the founder and CEO of Dray Alliance. The simplest way of thinking what we are is I focus on a similar problem as Alexandra, but from a different angle. We are creating the DoorDash of the drayage industry. So we
That's
currently,
an interesting way to put it.
people don't like talking about Uber anymore. That's why we mentioned DoorDash. And
Except today in Alexandra's case, it worked out real well for her.
There's also similarities because we do think of ports as the third leg in our marketplace, as the third stakeholder. And we would love to spend more time with port and terminal operators to learn how we can help them with the data aggregation we have aggregated from our platform. Because we do have thousands of trucks operating every day on the platform, delivering containers for some of the largest shippers in the world and the largest freight forwarders in the world. Company was started 4 years ago. We now have a group of almost 100 people based in LA. So in terms of disruption, I think the angle we're trying to take is that the only way we think we can solve the issue with congestion at the ports is to become more predictive in sharing out the data that we have gathered with the port terminals so they can be better prepared instead of being always caught in surprise. I think some data that we've seen is that truckers in LA miss about 30 to 50% of their appointments. Those are just unused.
Really?
And what we can do is spend time working with the ports directly and making sure those 50%, 30% of unused appointments gets used and make sure the truckers get there with the right equipment at the right time.
John, to that point, if you're losing 30%, and I don't know what the number is at Northwest Seaport, but if you're losing 30% of your appointments or losing 30% of your appointments at Long Beach, that's a tremendous waste where those are slots that are just, poof, they're gone. They're not being utilized.
Right. Yeah, it's certainly a problem, as Steve mentioned. And one of the advantages that we have, we're obviously a smaller gateway than my friend Mario here in LA down in San Pedro Bay, yet still one of the larger gateways for container trade in North America. We have the benefit of the fact that all of our terminals are using a similar platform.
Okay.
And that gives us a starting point by which we can build our own port portal because we don't have these separate platforms by which information is being pulled together. One of the things that we're working on right now with our port portal is to standardize our appointment system across all terminals. So imagine if you're a drayage truck driver, you can go onto our port portal and make an appointment at any one of the 5 international container terminals that we have in our gateway, rather than going into each individual system and do that. So it's just easier to perform that transaction.
Okay, and that what I would imagine then just gives the drivers and gives others, the dispatchers and others, more control over how they can send their fleets, they can send their trucks, because there's more predictability.
Right, and oftentimes you have dispatchers that have transactions at multiple terminals. So if they go into our port portal and they want to call on Terminal A and there isn't an appointment available, they can quickly turn to another terminal, make the appointment there, and then come back to the first terminal at a later point.
And Mario, as I got a note on this last night, your port and Blue Cargo going to announce a little bit of news in terms of a partnership that you've starting. Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, I think the issue of technology, digital transformation in this industry has been a conversation for quite a while. And I think what we're developing now is not only, as you've referenced, using technology to further efficiency and have confidence, get the confidence of the American shipper that there's not only efficiency, but reliability and predictability. So I think what we're doing here is using technology to further that, and in addition to that, in terms of the extended night hours. But let me just say one thing that I think, Dan, you hit on a very important point, e-commerce. Now, earlier you asked a question about 24/7, and is this going to be a viable opportunity now that all of a sudden we're going to go 24/7? Give me 16/5, and I think that's a great improvement.
Really? Okay.
You know, 16 hours, 5 days a week. But my point that I'm trying to make, for all of you in this room, all of us in this room, when did we first hear about e-commerce? Maybe over 10 years ago?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
And many of us, we kind of shrugged our shoulders, and you know, me being of the older generation, you know, I just like to go to the store and buy my stuff, right? What did e-COVID do? Well, my wife and I start experimenting with online buying, e-commerce. Pretty cool, isn't it? So as you mentioned, that elevated to the tune of not just double digits, but now 25%. And by the way, e-commerce is 24/7. Shoppers could shop at 10 p.m.
Wake up
They
at
can
3
shop
o'clock in the
at 4
morning and you gotta want something.
My point being is, look how long it took us as a nation to move towards e-commerce. So when we assess 24/7 in the expectation, let's give that time. Things don't change overnight. And I think those BCOs who were prepared for an unforeseen event like COVID, and who were successful, like, for example, Target. I mean, I'm not here to promote Target, but to be fair, Target was talking about the Amazon state of mind a couple years ago, e-commerce. And when this unforeseen event came about, they were ready. So my point being is, now that we're talking about partnerships involving technology, truck appointments, this is going to take time. But the optimism that I have, and to use a cliche that we've all heard, crisis brings opportunities. And in the West Coast, this is the opportunity to finally go beyond just talking about congestion and doing something about it. So that's my vision in terms of what's to come in the years, well, what's coming in the years to come.
And we should point out that this is not just a West Coast exclusive problem. I was reading a story this morning. New York, New Jersey has got backups. Savannah, as I was talking about before, has seen their container count, go from 300,000 to close to 500,000 in a very short period of time. So the East Coast ports are feeling that same crunch that you are, but yours is a little bit more pronounced because you've got two ports that sit in one bay and you sit right next to each other on the same piece of real estate.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, Dan, because this is not just a supply chain issue in Southern California or the West Coast. It's a national issue. In fact, one of the things that we should all be advocating with our respective representatives, where's the national freight policy? Canada has that. Mexico has one. China has one. We don't. So I think once we implement a national freight policy and we start talking about what are the significant factors and key components of the supply chain that we need to focus on, that's going to go a long way in helping us. And by the way, you mentioned New York, New Jersey, and Savannah. I called my good friend Griff over there, the executive director of Savannah. I said, hey, Griff, how many ships of anchor you have? Well, I got about 22 right now. Savannah, 22 ships at anchor moving that kind of amount. I mean, so this is a national issue. And I think in time, you're seeing here the next generation, these young people here, in terms of how they're going to implement technology, I'm very optimistic because that next generation is they get this. And we are going to have changes in terms of how we implement technology and how we operate ports.
And I'm glad you brought up the demographic and the age issue. I'm glad you brought that up because I've been wanting to ask this question.
I've been at both ends.
Yeah,
Many years ago.
So have I, and so have I as well. But have we as you're a young guy, Steve, a lot younger than I am, young lady. We seem to have, as an industry, and I'm not just talking about ports, but I'm also talking about trucking, I'm talking about rail, all of the major transportation modes. We've made it not so much, trying to find the right word, the closest word I can find it, it's difficult to enter those industries. And we've made it challenging. And as a society, as the father, by the way, of a high school age student, we have created this method the last 40, 50 years of the only way to be successful in life is to go to high school, get good grades in high school, go to State U for 4 years afterwards, get good grades at State U, get a lot of debt, and then at 23, 24, 25, go into the business world, where we have discounted the longshoremen, the steam fitters, the carpenters, the truck drivers, the railroad conductors, the men and women who work in these type of industries. What are we going to do to attract folks? Because I know there's a labor shortage in all the transportation modes. What do we do? John, why don't you start from me, and then we'll bring it across the panel.
I think it's a lot because people don't know about the jobs at the ports. As you said, they're educated to go to university, etc. So I think exactly a moment like this is a moment we can put the light on our industry. It's really funny because I started Blue Cargo like 3 years ago, and in my environment, like nobody knew around drayage or like transportation in general. And now I'm getting texts by my friends like every day because they see the 70 ships at the port of Long Beach. And my friends are texting me, oh, I'm really interested in your industry. I see containers all over my place when I go to work. And so just in general, I think we are at a highlight moment where we can make the most of this peak and bring new talents.
I've talked with a lot of folks. We had on a guest on the radio show a couple of weeks ago, a logistics professor from Ohio State. And he said one thing that the pandemic has done is that it has created all this attention to transportation. And he has seen enrollment in his department at Ohio State, which is a great university. He's seen enrollment in his department is skyrocketed, which is a good thing because those young people who are at Ohio State or whatever school they're at now, they're going to be the folks who in 10 or 12 years are going to be sitting on panels like these and being the leaders of the industry as you folks are becoming. What do we do to get more young people in this industry? What do we do to get more people who are interested as a young man like you are in drayage? Because it's not a sexy industry.
That is a great question. I've been asked many times, why are you in drayage? They've never seen a young face in drayage.
Because you can make money.
Well, I grew up in a background that's very industrial. My parents are import and export. So I grew up in a warehouse helping truckers receiving freight since I was 12. So I know in and out about how things are done and the frustration of everyone involved. One thing that I think people don't talk about is on the other side of the port. What's happening outside of the port actually greatly impact what's happening inside the port. But I think there is a missing layer in between of what are truckers experiencing outside of the port. What's the inventory level in each of these warehouses? We have it at a macro level, but we don't really know how exactly and what's happening outside of the port. And going back to your question of how do we attract more people to this industry is by leveraging more technology. What is hot is technology, is how we can utilize technology to have more companies that are doing very well and helping ports and helping each stakeholder to make this industry into a sexy industry that everyone wants to jump into. There are many hurdles we'll have to run through. For example, it's actually very difficult to become a drayage trucker today. There are a lot of friction. For example, years of experience that's needed to get the insurance needed in place to even enter the port to become a drayage trucker. There are a lot of those points of friction that needs to be eliminated for us to make those jobs even available to the general public. So that's some of the things that we have committed to is how do we erase each point of those friction and helping people to become part of this industry.
Jim?
Yeah, so I have a nephew who came out to LA about a month and a half ago, a freshman at the University of Pittsburgh, which is where I'm originally from. And of course, being the transportation nerd that I am, I forced him to let me drive him down to the port, because I said, this is really something you
And
should see.
you live right by Long Beach, you're telling me.
Yeah.
You live overlooking Mario's real estate.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I live about 15 minutes from the port, and we drove down. I showed him all those ships, and then kind of meandered through the port and explained how these containers are just stacking up. And what he found incredible was, when I was explaining to him again this whole idea of data aggregation, that that there's such a lack of connectivity between the various legs of the journey, and how there's still such a need for this from a technology standpoint, and that this is really the future of transportation, or whatever you want to call it, supply chain. And I'm telling you, ever since that, he's been peppering me with emails about international business, majoring in it. So, I mean,
You set the hook.
yeah, I mean, there's really, there is a fascination to it when you really kind of get down into it and start to understand all these challenges. And, Mario mentioned that we've been talking about e-commerce for the last 10 years. Mario and I have been to the TPM conference in Long Beach for the last 15 years. And yeah, I mean, we've been talking about it. But it's folks like Alexandra and Steve that I think are really going to transform this industry.
John, should we be surprised at the situation we're in right now? If we were to set the time machine back 10 years, should we be surprised that we're in this spot and that we're really grappling with the supply chain problem? Should this be an issue that we should be surprised?
Well, that's a great question. I've been in this industry, as you can see, 30 plus years. So I appreciate the younger generation that is coming into this industry. I have seen different cycles of challenge within the supply chain in those 30 years. So in general sense, no. And we will see more of that as we go forward. The challenge is each of those situations looks a little bit different. And so it has some unique aspects to it, and this one is unique as well. With the pandemic and the growth of e-commerce, some of the other key drivers that are creating this challenge for us. So I think we can learn from the past in terms of what we struggle with, and also today, take a look at what are the key aspects that are causing the congestion problems, and what do we do about it today going forward, so that, because we will be in this again at some point in time, it will look a little bit different. And it really shows how fragile the supply chain really is. And that Mario mentioned earlier, we don't really truly have a national freight strategy that is working for us. And I think it starts there. We need to invest more in our supply chain, certainly in our ports. And then, as you were talking about the workforce, I share the story. My daughter is in the industry. She's in the industry because she had visibility to the industry because her father worked in the industry. How do we create more visibility and, as I think Steve said, sexiness to the industry, attracting these younger, talented individuals to come into our industry, because there are really good paying jobs within this industry. And you don't necessarily have to have a college degree to secure one of these great paying jobs. So for me, and as a leader in the industry, one of the things that I feel is a responsibility is to get out to our community, get out to our high schools, our trade schools, and share with them about the industry so that they create this curiosity for them so they have visibility right in our backyard to some great opportunities.
Great point. I want to direct this to you, Mario, and then I'll ask the panel a little about this. We've now got this system, e-commerce. I can go on my computer at 3 a.m. and order a set of golf clubs and expect them in my house at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock the next morning if they happen to be in the warehouse. Warehouse rates, vacancy rates right now around ports, it's extraordinarily low. It's in the 1%, 1.8%. Outside of the ports, it's a little bit higher, maybe 4.5%. But yet, if you try to build a warehouse somewhere, you're likely to run into neighborhood or local opposition because they don't want a warehouse because they don't want the trucks, because they don't want the congestion, they don't want the diesel fumes, they don't want all of the stuff that comes along with the warehouse. And I've been covering a story for ttnews.com about this situation in Chicago involving an old country club that's sort of fallen on hard times, and the neighborhood is going crazy about the fact that they don't want a warehouse there. But yet, folks expect that when they go on their computer at 3 o'clock in the morning, they want their product the next morning. So how do we balance these two, and sometimes 3 and 4 and 5 competing factors so that we have enough warehouses close to Long Beach, and we have enough fulfillment centers, and we have enough warehouse space so our warehouses aren't bursting at the seams like they are now?
That's a great point.
And if we could solve that problem, we'd solve all the world's problems.
That's a great point, Dan. And I think what you just described is, in essence, what led to globalization, what led to outsourcing, because no one wanted a factory in their neighborhood, a warehouse, and the kind of residual impacts that this has. The United States was a leading manufacturer when I was a kid. Everything was made in America.
Pittsburgh.
Now we have what we have. And there's a mindset that feels, wait a minute, that's not fair. We're losing jobs. But to get to that point, which I don't believe we ever will, is about this issue, not in my neighborhood. And to your point, which is for that reason that ports are talking about inland port connectivity for the Port of Long Beach. Our priority, we've talked about trucks and drayage. They're always going to be part of this supply chain. However, we're emphasizing rail for the reasons you just stated. We need to get that container out of the harbor complex by rail, ASAP, out of the metropolitan area, out of the region to that inland connectivity. And hence
60, 70, 80 miles away.
Yeah, and hence the inland port connectivity is a prioritized discussion now. We talked about it 10 years ago, but now we're seeing the results of that, and particularly in California, with the political agenda with regard to reducing emissions and climate change. It's very difficult now to create any kind of corridor that has emission impacts, congestion. So we need to think out of the box on how we continue to do that. And last, I'll say, that's one reason for 24/7, because people do not want congestion in their corridors and that kind of movement in day hours. But if we mirror what people do in other parts of the world, and for example, as a trucker, query whether or not, shouldn't we pick up that container at 5 in the morning and get to San Bernardino by 6:30? That makes a lot of sense. And I think people in the surrounding communities probably would appreciate that as opposed to being part of that daytime traffic and congestion.
So now we're back to the technology issues that are being talked about to try to reduce some of that congestion that's by the ports so that the folks don't complain, that the diesel emissions and all those things. Now it's back in your court again to solve the world's problems.
Want to take that one?
I think about the warehouses in particular. Really often the small warehouses have workers from the 5, 6 a.m. Window. So talking about the hood gates at the port, this is really something that could directly go to the warehouse and come back with another container to the port. And echoing to what both Jim and Mario talked about, but I think it's all about connectivity, and that's the change that needs to happen in the next years and that will happen, not only in terms of like intermodal ways, but about technology. And also to attract talents, it's a lot on the responsibilities of the technology to companies to show that they are open, they are working together, they have modern technology to share APIs with the other partners, etc. So I think connecting the actors is the most important because everybody needs to see aggregated data. And that's where there's the major lack today. And if you take several sources of data, you will find the same data points with different value. So what we've seen, for example, so at the beginning, Blue Cargo was really the back office of a trucking company, especially returning the empty containers because it's becoming a big pain point. And we just observed that some of our dispatchers were actually sending the schedules and taking screenshots of Blue Cargos and sharing it to their warehouse because the warehouse want to know which container is going to go back to the port first. So we thought that was super interesting, so we went talking to the warehouses. And there we saw all this buildup of empty containers because the warehouse has no information on which empty container is going to be able to go back first to the terminal because what appointments are the terminal taking. So because now we can share this information, the warehouse can prioritize whether they have all these full loads coming in, whether they want to offload the Costco 20 standard or the Yanming 40 standard based on the fact that they know that the port has more appointments for the Yanming. So now they can prioritize that and decrease the buildup that has been created at the warehouse. So that's like one example of connectivity, but being able to share that data. So for example, because the warehouse receives that information, they share with us when the container is offloaded and immediately the trucker can know. So this transmission of information, it's not data sharing for data sharing. It's like operational business operations that needs to be made and rely on the data flowing at the right moment. And that's why we were also talking about like which system you use earlier. And of course, it's good if you're a port that can have one system across all the terminals. That makes a lot of things easy. But the thing is that we shouldn't be relying on one front end because everybody should be actually able to use the front end they want. What matters is that the data is coming to your front end, especially like some systems are made for terminals, for ports. Maybe the truckers don't want to see the same view. Maybe they want their system that actually focuses on optimizing their drayage. So what matters is just that the systems communicate together, that the appointment system shares the slots through API, which we are already seeing in some of the terminals, especially the automated one, so that truckers can, no matter what system they use, be able to take and secure the appointments via API, and that will reduce the manual work that has to be done to coordinate operations. That would put less pressure on the workforce, that would empower them with technology, and so we can have them do many more things like optimization, dual transactions, all the things they can't focus on because they're just trying to get the data.
Go ahead, you jump in.
To piggy off what Alexandra said and what Mario said earlier, I think this is an opportunity for the entire industry to look ahead and look at now what's available on the market. What are some of the data aggregations tools that we have? What are the data available in this industry now that we can think in 5 and 10-year terms of rebuilding this industry that's completely off a data-driven method to bring more visibility and connectivity to the entire industry. I think there's a lot of talks, historically in the last many years about data aggregation, data connectivity, but I don't see enough being put into action. I want to challenge everyone here on thinking about what does that even mean? What kind of data do we need? What kind of data do ports need? And how are ports going to utilize those set of data? I also want to challenge to not only think about near term of appointments becoming available, the UI that's on different systems, different terminals, but also think about how can we utilize what's happening outside of the market? What's happening in the warehouse? How do we get to a point where the port knows which warehouse is unloading which container and when does the port expect that container to go back to which terminal? So if we can get to that point in the port industry, then we'll truly have solved the full visibility problem of this entire industry. And that's sort of my vision of a future of the port complex. And I'd love to help on how we can get there sooner.
But we also need, and to the point about your company with FedEx, you guys are looking for employees. You're hiring 90,000, 100,000 employees. Your competitor has got the help wanted sign out as well. I mean, it's a tight job market. You're out there trying to get employees to move this along. And here we are, Christmas is 90 days away. Here it comes. Santa's going to be delivering his stuff on his sleigh. And if the sleigh's empty, there's going to be grief to pay.
Yeah.
What's your level of concern?
Yeah, we are struggling with hiring at all levels. I mean, especially, from a warehouse perspective. But, as I'm listening to all of this and we're talking nationally, as the head of the ocean freight product, I've got to think internationally. One of the things that is challenging and frustrating for me is that, we feel like both sides don't really communicate very well in terms of, there's so much production coming out of China, it's peak, it's the Christmas peak, just keep loading the ships and sending them, and, they're just piling up.
Get it here and we'll figure it out when it gets there.
Yeah, and I think there's really almost an international entity that's required to start really pacing and maybe suggesting, okay, we're gonna have to, wait a few days or skip this port or that port. And, again, I see a huge need for that. That's the physical part to be married up with the technology side of it, and really something that we need.
As I said at the beginning when we started the discussion, I said when we get to about the 3/4 of the mark, we're almost there. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then please, if you've got questions from the floor, please jump in and we'll continue the conversation going forward. You run one of the biggest ports on the West Coast. What's your level of angst for the next 3 months? What's your level of angst?
Well, we're dealing with the same crisis on a smaller scale that LA Long Beach is. We have, I believe today, about 15 vessels at anchor. We have customers that want their freight out of the terminals. They can't get their freight out of the terminals.
And they're willing to pay more.
And they're willing to pay, they're forced to pay more. We have a drayage truck community that is short-staffed, so we don't have the power supply that we need. The warehouses are struggling. We formed a task force made up of all of the stakeholders in the supply chain, and we meet once a week to tackle these issues and try and put together plans that will minimize the impact as we get through the holiday season. I'll give you an example of one. We have 2 terminals in Seattle that were underutilized. One's being redeveloped for larger ships. The other is was really a question mark whether it was going to maintain cargo activity there or be transformed into a mixed-use development. Today, both of those terminals are full of containers, storing empty containers so that the drayage trucks can drop them there and then go pick up an inbound load. Otherwise, they were hamstrung because they didn't have anywhere to take their empty container, and they need sorry.
Someone's calling to complain about.
Yeah. They need the chassis to pick up the inbound container. So those are just a few examples that we're tackling today to try and get through this crisis. I really appreciate the conversation around technology because mid-longer term, that's got to be part of the solution for sure.
Okay. Questions from the floor, please, ladies and gentlemen. I can't see you real well, but if you've got questions, please. We have a question where? Okay, please, go ahead. They're going to get you a microphone so we can, there's a lady coming right behind you.
Thank you very much. John and Mario, forgive me. But as I listen to this, I'm impressed with the analysis and the vision for the future and the importance of technology. But one thing that hasn't been mentioned this morning is labor. We've got a contract looming next year on the West Coast. How do you convince labor that technology is a good thing for them?
I'll jump in.
How about those Dodgers?
So first of all, there's a difference in my mind anyway between technology and automation, and it's important to distinguish those two. So when we're talking to our labor partners about advancements in technology, we seem to, they're receptive to that idea because it makes their job easier. What is important for them is to make sure that when the equipment is deployed at the terminal, there's a seat for a person to sit in. That's where automation comes in, and there's conversation about displaced workforce. So I don't see a problem with the advancement of technology in our labor force. In fact, as I said, we see a receptivity to that, and they are leaning into those opportunities.
Other questions, please? Back over there to the right, thank you.
I've got a mic here. So what's normal for this time of year? I'm over here.
Oh, there you are. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead, please.
So, here that now's the peak season, what's normal as far as ships at anchorage? I mean, everybody's seeing this picture, the Fox News is covering, there's 70 ships. Are 20, is that what's normal for San Pedro Bay, or what's normal for the Pacific Northwest? And then a second element of that is how much of the data is transparent and how much of the data is proprietary as far as the ability to actually move across these platforms and achieve what you're seeking to do in these areas. Thank you.
What's a normal number?
Jim, what's normal is 0. So, with regard to the second part, I think, which was about technology, I think I think it's going to come a long ways. It's come a long ways. We were talking about trucks. So those of us who've been here for a few years in this industry, let's go back a decade. At San Pedro Bay Complex, if you were a trucker, your instructions were show up at the terminal. Whether it's 9 o'clock, whether it's 1 o'clock, whether it's 4 o'clock. And these people would show up, and they could sit there waiting 2 hours, sometimes 3 in times of heavy volume. We've come a long ways. So there's been a lot of improvements, appointment systems. I think it's fair that John's been a leader in his area in the Northwest on this, and many of us now furthering technology on appointment systems, as you've seen on this stage. And let's make one thing very clear about this whole issue of data sharing. It's not about proprietary interests, because for those of us who have bought into the need of digital transformation, that Europe is so much advanced in so many ways, and Asia, of course. But for those of us who have talked about this, it's always been contingent and qualified that it's not about proprietary interests. And I think whether you talk to MERS, whether you talk to the people in the trucking industry, they all agree that, okay, I'm getting a little bit comfortable that if I share this data, it's not my proprietary interests. So we're at a very good place in terms of people now having more comfort with sharing data. Data that is not proprietary in nature. So going into the future, I think we're going to see a continuing involvement of this, what we call digital transformation. And you see the next generation here on stage who, their mandate is to continue to implement this. And so, and my last comment, yes, we've been talking about the challenges, but let's remind ourselves, where were we in the spring of 2020? For Port of Long Beach, we were in the red. I didn't know where this was going. I always said to my commissioners, when we had a record number in 2018, we moved 8.1 million containers in 2018. And all my commissioners were saying, oh, what a great job you're doing, this and that. I said, you know what, I'm not taking credit for any of this because I know when the number goes down, I don't want to take credit for that either. And what happened last spring, let's remember everybody in this room, where were we? It was a dire situation. Now, I think despite the challenges, the economy is great. Business is good. Now, there's some delays for the consumers and the shippers, but we'll get through this.
We have another question from the floor over here. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Hello, Robert Ramsdell, Dredging Resources. Jim kind of asked my question, but I was going to ask Ms. Griffon and Mr. Nguyen. You were talking about APIs and shared data. Are your two companies sharing data? Are you able to? Kind of putting you guys on the spot.
We are. We are partners in working together and sharing data with each other. I believe, is the #1 user of Blue Cargo's platform. So we are sharing data actively with each other. And I think following on the last question of Jim, I really like how Mario addressed that. Is there's a lot of pessimistic sentiment in this industry, and all the news sharing photos of lines of container ships off the coast. And as a country, we always look to the other side of the ocean of looking at, hey, China has all this great infrastructure. They must be doing really well. But Port of Shanghai has 90 ships off anchored. No one talks about that. So I do want to be more optimistic in that I truly think this is an opportunity for us to leapfrog and bring a new set of standards into the port industry. So sorry about the digression.
I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up because this is something that's taking place right now. In Washington, Congress is, grinding, is the only way to describe it. They're grinding their way through an infrastructure bill. It's not a done deal yet. We know that it's in the process. It's close, but it's not there yet. Extra money would help your port with cranes, with dredging, with terminal space. I would imagine same thing in Seattle. More cranes. You guys are expanding up there. What does this mean? If this does get on Mr. Biden's desk in the next couple of months, is this going to be a big deal and help the industry out?
Absolutely, absolutely. And first of all, I want to thank the Association of American Port Authorities and the staff that's been working so hard with regard to us having a voice in DC about this. In addition to our respective ports, through our respective lobbyists and what we've done. But I think the good news, Dan, that we could all agree on is for once in this nation, we're talking more than just bridges and highways. We're talking about bridges, highways, and ports. That's a big win for us. Now,
now you're on the table. Your name is included in the conversation.
Absolutely. I know we may not have the piece of the pie that we would like, but just the other development that we should think about the progress here in getting awareness in government. For the White House to appoint an envoy.
And John Picardi.
John Picardi, to address these issues. I'm thinking, oh my God, what a relief. Now, maybe it took congestion, it took ships at anchor, it took the complaints of the exporters to get this thing on their radar. Whatever that was, it's a good thing because now government, Washington is hearing from us. Chris Connor, who's done an excellent job in directing here at AAPA, we had an open house at AAPA back in March or April. I can't remember. In June, oh my God. The next generation, you better be ready. But you know who was there? The chairman of the Transportation Committee.
Peter DeFazio.
Yeah, he was there for a couple hours with us. I mean, to have that conversation and ability to have those conversations and that influence, it's huge. People, government, whether it's in Sacramento in California or you have a great senator in Patty Murray in Washington, people are honing in on the importance of the transportation industry, port industry. Last, who's the Federal Reserve looking at in terms of decisions of monetary policy? They've been chiming in on this. Why? The cost of shipping and transportation has increased fivefold. That has impacted inflationary factors, and that has impacted the decision makers in terms of how we set monetary policy. So finally, we are getting attention. Let's take this opportunity and take advantage of that to make sure that we continue to advocate in the way that we all have in this room.
So now that you have a seat at the table, it's time to get up there and get what you need to get it done.
The other aspect of that is important to the communities that we serve is to grow in an environmentally sustainable manner.
Especially in Southern California, you've got California Air Resources Board, you've got all sorts of environmental regulations that are different from everybody else.
And there's a cost to that, and it's huge. And so it just doesn't happen. You have to find partners that will invest in it. We need the help of the federal government. And so this infrastructure package is critical for the growth of the ports.
You know, and for the West Coast, what I've said to the administration, because sustainability is a big conversation in this administration, you know, the environmental agenda, the agenda on climate change. So for those of us in the West Coast, be it California and Washington, who have been very much on that agenda, we also are saying, okay, we should be first in line when it comes to funding. Because at least for the Port of Long Beach, we're not promising we're going to be environmental ESG, social governance here. We're not promising what we're going to do for the environment. Our resume shows it. So we're hopeful that this administration says, look, you guys have paid your dues on this, a very important issue. You're first in line. Now, of course, that's a selfish perspective on my part, but I think that's what we're doing here. And you know, John has done the same thing up in Seattle.
Last question in the remaining couple seconds. Any questions from the floor? Yes, we have a question coming back over here.
What's your best guess on the direction of the container pricing? You think it's going to move any direction or stay where it is?
I'll take a stab at that, and let's see how wrong I am 6 months from now. So I'll throw that caveat out there. I actually think that we may have reached a peak anyway. I don't anticipate that ocean freight rates are going to go up much more for a couple of reasons. One, the Ministry of Transportation in China and the FMC are both taking a little bit closer look at this. And we already saw an action taken from CMA CGM, one of the big steamship lines, where they said they're going to put a ceiling, no more spot rate hikes. I think that all the carriers have basically said, look, I mean, we're raking in tremendous profits right now, you know, perhaps deservedly considering how much they've lost in the past. But I think everybody's kind of said enough is enough. Now, so that's me saying I don't think rates are going to go up. Are they going to stay where they are? I think that there will be very little downward pressure between now and Chinese New Year, which is, you know, February, just because we're already seeing a heavy flow of like spring inventory, where normally, you know, the months of October and November are the slack ocean time, but, you know, we're seeing spring inventory coming in. So demand is going to remain very high, at least through February. All right.
Sort of increase like a rocket, float down like a feather.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Well, that's the way it is with oil prices. I mean, they shoot up and then they sort of work their way back down. Got about a minute left, and I just want to real quickly, optimistic that we're going to get through this and that things will be okay in the next couple of months with some hiccups, but it's going to be okay.
I'm very optimistic.
Sure.
Sure, optimistic. I think it's going to take more than a couple of months. I think by mid-year next year, we'll see significant improvement.
You're next.
I agree with John. Looking at the inventory level at warehouses around the ports, I do think it's going to take more than a few months.
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I mean, this is such a transformational period in the history of international logistics. We'll get through this, and it's going to force a lot of much needed change.
You get the last word. You had the toughest route. You get the last word.
Yeah, I think we're already at the beginning of a huge phase of growth that will actually create wealth for many people in America, and actually the transportation is going to be a big part of that change.
You read my story that I wrote about Donald Bryan? You wrote my story. Thank you very much. Well, that wraps up our time. We're all out of time.
I have a question. I have satellite radio. I didn't know you had a show. What station is that?
146.
Okay, I'm plugging you in here. 146. I'm going to listen to that show.
I hope all of you do. I'm on Sirius XM Saturdays and Sundays, 1 o'clock to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and then Sundays from 12 to 2 o'clock. And then I fill in and do the newscast and the like as well. And you can read my stuff at ttnews.com. Thank our panel. Alexandra Griffon, who was with us, made it all the way from Houston. Jim Rinchuiso from FedEx, Steve, John, and Mario, thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And thank you for spending time this morning chatting with us. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.